I was in a spot where a lot of people were telling me not to do television, right? A lot of big shots, my
Why?
big shot friends. I don't know. They just said, it uses you up and this, that, and the other thing.
A beloved sitcom, a chaotic week, and a decision that stunned the cast. For years, whispers circled why Taxi, the breakout 1978 series that launched icons, kept flirting with disaster. Danny Devito has finally laid out the wild truth.
It's time to remind you hacks just who the boss is.
What really happened on stage 23 when a guest star arrived reeking of cologne, flanked by 2 escorts, and refused to drop the act? Why did executives pack the bleachers to witness a firing in real time? You'll hear the inside account, Devito's first-hand recollection, of the week Taxi imploded from the inside, and why that chaos reshaped the show's fate. The setup nobody could control. It started in the Paramount commissary, not a writer's room. Danny Devito is mid-egg salad when executive producer Ed Weinberger leans in with what sounds like a gift and a dare. The upcoming Taxi script, Brother Rat, will feature Danny's on-screen brother. Great, except there's a twist. Andy's going to play him as Tony Clifton. No winks, no admissions, no sidebars. The cast must treat Clifton as a separate, real person, on set, off set, all week. Devito's first reaction is honest confusion. So I'm acting opposite my brother, who is really Andy, but I can never say it out loud? Weinberger nods. That is the rule. The bit only works if nobody, especially the performers, breaks. And with that, a sitcom famous for precision timing agrees to stage a live grenade. The talking point logic is seductive. First, stunt casting without saying it's a stunt. Andy Kaufman's myth expands, and Taxi rides the buzz. Second, comedy tension built into every beat. If Clifton never drops the mask, every rehearsal is a high-wire act the audience will feel by Friday. Third, prestige heat. The town will whisper that Taxi allowed performance art to clash with network routine and survived. But there is a problem in the math. A weekly sitcom is not a downtown stage piece. It is a machine that must generate a clean script on Monday, a blocked show by midweek, a shot show by the end. Gags, props, camera lines, wardrobe quick changes, none of that can be improvised if the center will not hold. The producers know this. They also know that when Kaufman commits, he commits. The plan counts on artistry. The schedule demands obedience. And somewhere between those two, a fuse is lit. Monday should be the easiest day on television. The call is 10 a.m. The whole gang rolls back in from the weekend, trading stories. Mary Lou Henner talks about where she went. Judd Hirsch shares something dry and sharp. Devito riffs and warms the room. Then the pages hit the table. The table read is the ritual that sets the week's tempo. Jokes that land get circled. Jokes that thud get penciled for surgery. Beats get shaved. Runner gags get tuned. And everyone leaves with the same spine. Only this Monday, there is a missing vertebra. No Andy, no Clifton, just an empty chair and a clock eating the morning. Ed keeps glancing at his watch. The writers hover, tightening what is already a strong draft. Department heads float, waiting for the read to unlock their lists. 5 minutes becomes 20, 20 becomes 40. Somebody cracks a line about method traffic. It buys a laugh. It cannot buy the hour they are losing. Inside the silence, you feel the rules tightening like a tourniquet. Because the show agreed to the premise, we will treat Clifton as real. They cannot simply pick up a phone and say, "Andy, where are you?" That would puncture the ritual before it starts. The bit's power depends on everyone playing along, even when the clock punishes them. So the producers juggle contingencies without saying them out loud. Can they read around the absent brother? No, he's in too many scenes. Can they table certain sequences and move to pickups? Not at a read. You cannot block a ghost. A table read that starts late still gives you the day. A table read that does not start at all steals the week. Word filters in that Andy has been away doing a college gig. In theory, that explains the absence. In practice, it raises the stakes. If Clifton treats the room like a club set, the week will drown. Devito, a creature of sharp rhythm and sharper instincts, can feel the mood tilting. Judd is patient, then less so. The crew looks like a pit crew with no car. Even the script pages start to feel heavier, as if they know they are becoming props in a larger act. Somewhere in the building, E.D. Weinberger and the stage managers begin to sketch the unthinkable. What if we have to replace a brother we have not met? The idea sounds absurd at noon and sensible by 1. And by 2 hours past call, the varnish of Monday has somewhat worn down. The friendly catch-up chatter is gone, and the steel rack's attendant vibration struggle can be heard in their places. The coffee is cold. The air has that prickly static that precedes a breakthrough or blow-up. Everyone knows what a run-of-the-mill delay looks like. It's traffic, a last-minute change of wardrobe, a missing prop. This is different. This is an idea that'll take a whole production's creativity as collateral. And yet nobody ever manages the simple sentence, "This is Andy," because even that, the game prohibits. Noble at 9 in the morning, punishing by 11. By 1, it feels like denial. Here is the paradox that would later start to define Danny's big realization about why they pulled the plug on Taxi. At the end of the day, actually making such an outrageous decision was also a choice that jeopardized, quite simply, a TV show's ability to deliver on their content promises. If a cast isn't able to come together on Monday, every department downstream pays for that. You are not losing minutes. You are losing shots, angles, alibis that you need when Friday kicks hard. You are burning trust. And trust, more than ratings, is what keeps a show safe when the numbers wobble or the studio gets nervous. During a normal week, the table read buys you that trust. This week, the table read is already something of a cautionary tale. Then comes the creak of a stage door, the shift in everyone's posture, and a scent so sweet it coats the room before the man crosses the threshold. Voices drop. Heads turn. The late guest has arrived, not as Andy Kaufman, not as a colleague, but as Tony Clifton, larger than the doorway, drenched in cologne, a grin that dares someone to blink first. And he is not alone. 2 escorts on his arms, notes scrawled across his script, a whole different kind of schedule in his eyes. The room has waited all morning for a read. It does not realize it has been waiting for a siege. The read finally begins, then the door swings open, and the room fills with perfume. The bit has arrived. Enter Tony Clifton. When the door finally opened, the cast thought the day could at last begin. Instead, it turned into a performance none of them had signed up for. 2 hours after call time, Tony Clifton made his entrance. Not quietly, not apologetically, but as if the stage belonged to him. On one arm, a woman in a glittery dress. On the other hand, another dressed just as loud. Their perfume filled the air before their heels hit the floor. Clifton reeked of cologne so thick that Danny Devito later said it seemed like the entire room had been dipped in it. He wasn't just late. He was making an entrance that swallowed the day whole. The table read, should have been a focused hour. Instead, it devolved into a spectacle. Clifton tossed his script onto the table, pages marked up with notes nobody had asked for. He objected to lines, questioned the direction, and treated his colleagues as though they were lucky to have him there. Every suggestion turned into a standoff. every page a battle. For the rest of the cast, professionals who relied on efficiency to get the week rolling, it was like rehearsing with a storm cloud that refused to move. The hookers at his side weren't just accessories. They became props in his ongoing act, laughing too loudly at his jokes and glaring at anyone who didn't play along. The damage was immediate. Within minutes, it was clear they weren't going to finish the read-through. Clifton complained of an appointment he had to leave for. Ed shrugged off. Weinberger attempted to rein him in and walked out, taking his escorts and his script with him. The show, scheduled down to the hour, had just lost an entire day to the act. For a sitcom, losing Monday is like a surgeon losing the scalpel before the operation begins. Every part of the week, the rewrites, the blocking, the camera rehearsals, depends on that first full run. Without it, everything backs up, and pressure mounts with every passing hour. Behind the laughter and shock, panic set in. Devito, Judd Hirsch, and the rest of the cast knew they couldn't build the episode like this. The writers, who had crafted a solid script, suddenly had nothing to work from, and the producers faced a nightmare: keep Clifton and risk the episode imploding, or find a replacement and hope Kaufman wouldn't turn on them. Nobody wanted to admit the obvious, that Kaufman's alter ego had hijacked the show before the cameras ever rolled. Everyone wanted to protect Andy's reputation while somehow saving their own week of work, but the cracks were now too wide to ignore. The experiment had gone from daring to dangerous. Clifton wasn't simply pushing boundaries, he was testing how much chaos a studio could tolerate before it pushed back. Every laugh he forced, every delay he caused, cost money and time. And worse, it eroded trust, the invisible glue that kept a hit show afloat. By the time Clifton strutted out of the room, leaving the cast stranded mid-read, the question wasn't whether this would derail the episode. It was how long before it derailed the series itself. By sunrise, a secret visitor is walking onto the lot, insurance in human form. The quiet replacement. By Tuesday morning, the optimism was gone. The producers knew they couldn't risk another wasted day, so they made a decision that had to be carried out in whispers. Bring in a backup. His name was Richie Ferengi, a seasoned actor with the chops to slip into the role of Devito's brother if things with Clifton completely collapsed. He wasn't announced, he wasn't paraded around, he was ushered in quietly, like a fire extinguisher stashed in the corner. The cast met him discreetly, careful not to let Kaufman or Clifton catch wind of what was happening. Everyone understood the stakes. If Andy found out, it would feel like betrayal. But if the production didn't have a safety net, the entire episode could implode. Meanwhile, Clifton returned to the set, and he hadn't softened. Once again, he showed up hours late, dragging along his escorts as if they were part of the cast. But this time, he came bearing gifts, small toys and noisemakers wrapped like party favors, which he handed out with theatrical enthusiasm. For the professionals, he declared, as though the chaos he had caused the day before didn't exist. The gesture might have been intended as a charm, but it landed like gasoline on an open flame. The cast played politely, but inside, the frustration was reaching a breaking point. Judd Hirsch, normally the steady anchor of the group, was visibly seething. His patience had been ground down to the nub, and, by all accounts, he was ready to explode. The producers had reached their limit, too. Education Weinberger made the call. Clifton had to go. But even this couldn't be simple. Danny Devito later revealed the behind-the-scenes phone call that changed how the firing had to be handled. The night before the dismissal, Ed had called Andy Kaufman to warn him. Andy pleaded with him, "Please, don't fire him for being a bad actor. Say it's his lateness. If you say he's not talented, he'll never get hired again." It was a fascinating request, Kaufman protecting the myth of Clifton's talent, even as the character burned bridges in real time. The producers agreed. The official line would be punctuality, not performance. But Clifton wasn't about to bow out gracefully. When Weinberger prepared to cut him loose, Andy's alter ego refused to leave the stage. He argued, he postured, he threatened to sue Paramount. What should have been a straightforward firing spiraled into another act of theater, one designed to stretch the bit as far as possible. Everyone in the room could see it. Clifton wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. He was a liability. The cast sat in stunned silence as the alter ego dug in his heels, daring the network to make the next move. This was supposed to be the resolution to a chaotic stunt. Instead, it set the stage for the loudest meltdown yet. Word of Clifton's pending firing leaked out, and by the next day, the spectacle would no longer be contained to the soundstage. The press was already circling, waiting to turn a private dismissal into a public humiliation. The word leaks. And now the bleachers are filling with executives. Executives in the bleachers. By midweek, the soundstage didn't feel like a workplace anymore. It felt like an arena. The bleachers that normally sat empty during rehearsals began to fill with faces the cast rarely saw outside of contract negotiations. Barry Diller, Jeffrey Katzenberg, suits from the network and the studio, seated shoulder to shoulder, not to watch a comedy, but to witness a confrontation. It wasn't common for executives of that caliber to wander into a weekday rehearsal. Their presence sent one clear message. This was no longer just a creative problem. It was a crisis that threatened the show's reputation and the studio's authority. Tony Clifton, oblivious or perhaps deliberately performing for the new audience, strutted across the stage like he was headlining Caesar's palace. He smelled of the same cloying cologne, flanked again by his escorts, throwing barbs at the cast and making an ordeal out of every cue. But the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter that Clifton thrived on was gone. In its place was silence. The kind of silence that makes every word hang heavy. The executives weren't amused. They were taking notes. Every wasted minute was more ammunition for the argument that Taxi had lost control of its set. Education. Weinberger tried to execute the plan. Fire Clifton for lateness, stick to policy, and avoid any accusation that Kaufman, or his alter ego, was untalented. But Clifton refused to play along. Instead of leaving quietly, he dug in, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, and railing against the studio. To the cast watching from the sidelines, it was like witnessing a hostage situation where the hostage was time itself. Every argument, every delay, every refusal to step off the stage made the cost of the bit balloon further. For the executives in the stands, this wasn't about art anymore. It was about control. If Clifton could hijack an entire production week, embarrass the cast, and thumb his nose at authority in front of the press, what would stop the next actor from trying the same thing? Networks lived and died on the promise that their shows would be delivered on time and on budget. What was happening now made it look like Paramount had lost command of its own house. And the more Clifton fought, the more it looked like Kaufman's experiment had crossed from comedy into insubordination. Danny Devito later described the tension in the room as unbearable. Nobody wanted to be the one to break character, and acknowledged that this was Kaufman's doing. At the same time, everyone understood that the studio's patience was evaporating. The executives weren't there to laugh. They were there to decide if the circus had to be shut down for good. Outside the stage door, a new audience is waiting, with notebooks. The press ambush. If the executives thought the humiliation would end the moment Tony Clifton was escorted off the stage, they were wrong. Clifton had already laid the groundwork for his grand finale. The night before his firing, Andy Kaufman had picked up the phone and made calls, not to his agent, not to allies in the cast, but to the press. By the time Paramount Security prepared to walk him out, reporters from the Los Angeles Times and other outlets were already camped outside the soundstage, cameras in hand, waiting for a show. What should have been a quiet dismissal was about to be turned into a headline-grabbing circus. Clifton played it perfectly. As Weinberger stuck to the agreed script, firing him for lateness, not incompetence, Clifton went loud, ranting about conspiracies, blaming Paramount executives, and vowing to sue the studio. Every word, every shove of resistance was designed for the flashbulbs. Outside, reporters didn't see Kaufman's experimental bit. They saw a man in a bad suit and sunglasses being thrown off the set of a hit show. The distinction was lost, and that was the point. Clifton had turned his exit into a theater, and the press swallowed it whole. For the cast inside, the ambush was devastating. They had already lost days of rehearsal. Morale was in pieces, and now their show was being dragged into scandal. Danny Devito later admitted that the room knew they had been set up. The cameras outside weren't a coincidence. They were a calculated move to make the firing bigger than the show itself. Andy wanted Clifton's dismissal to live beyond the week's taping, and he got his wish. The problem was, the collateral damage was enormous. Network brass, who had been uneasy after watching Clifton derail rehearsals, were now staring at a new nightmare: bad publicity. Instead of headlines about the wit and charm of Taxi, the trade papers buzzed with stories of chaos on set, actors clashing, and Paramount losing control. The myth of Tony Clifton grew, but the reputation of the show took a hit. Advertisers and affiliates didn't care that it was performance art. They cared about stability, and stability was the last word anyone would use to describe that week. The cast's loyalty to Kaufman made it worse. Nobody wanted to throw him under the bus, yet nobody could deny the damage that had been done. They sat in stunned disbelief, watching as Clifton's stunt leapt from the soundstage to the front pages. What had started as an edgy experiment in blending art with sitcom convention was now a PR crisis that Paramount would not soon forget. And this is where Danny Devito's revelation bites deepest. The firing wasn't the real danger. The press ambush was. It proved that Clifton could take an internal problem and broadcast it to the world, dragging the entire show down with him. In the cold calculus of television, that wasn't just embarrassing, it was unsustainable. What Devito understood, and what the studio never forgot, was that this wasn't just one bad week. It was a preview of what could happen again. And once the press gets a taste of blood, the people writing the checks start asking a different question. Is this show worth the risk? And that's where Danny's revelation cuts deepest. The reason Taxi got cancelled wasn't just numbers. It was math the audience never sees. The real cancellation math. To the public, cancellations always look simple. A show either runs out of gas, loses ratings, or falls out of fashion. But Danny Devito's account makes clear that Taxi's trouble wasn't just about numbers, it was about trust, and how quickly trust evaporates when a production spirals out of control. Behind the scenes, every wasted hour, every flared temper, and every bad headline converts to something executives understand better than comedy: money. The Clifton fiasco bled money from the moment he showed up late. Table reads that should have finished in an hour dragged on until they collapsed. Blocking schedules were pushed back. Camera teams had no material to stage, so over time, bills piled up without progress. Escorts wandering the lot weren't just a distraction. They became a liability that set off alarms with studio security. Every time Clifton stalled or stormed out, the budget absorbed the hit. For a sitcom, which survives on delivering episodes in a tightly choreographed 5-day cycle, losing even a single day is catastrophic. This time, they lost almost the entire week. And then came the bigger cost: credibility. Paramount and ABC had sold Taxi as a prestige sitcom with razor-sharp writing and an all-star cast. When executives like Barry Diller and Jeffrey Katzenberg felt compelled to sit in the bleachers and personally watch a firing, it meant something deeper than chaos was at play. It meant the show no longer inspired confidence. If one guest star could derail production and spin the firing into a national headline, what would happen the next time the show tried to push boundaries? Advertisers don't care if a stunt is art. They care if Thursday night's episode is ready on time, and if the network looks like it's in control of its product. Devito's recollection highlights how quickly that control slipped away. Clifton's refusal to exit gracefully proved that the show couldn't protect itself from sabotage, even sabotage orchestrated by one of its own stars. The official line that he was fired for lateness was supposed to soften the blow. Instead, it made the studio look weak. The press wasn't fooled, and executives had to wonder, how many more battles like this could the show afford before affiliates, sponsors, or even unions started to lose patience? This is the math audiences never see. Ratings might be strong, fan mail might be pouring in, but when the internal calculations tilt toward risk, a show's days are numbered. After the Clifton ambush, every renewal meeting for Taxi came with new baggage. Executives didn't just measure audience size, they measured headaches. Each time the series needed another season, the memory of escorts, perfume, and reporters at the studio gates resurfaced. That wasn't just embarrassing, it was a warning. And this is where Devito's revelation reframes the whole story. Taxi wasn't simply canceled because of falling viewership or shifting schedules. It was canceled because one chaotic week convinced the money people they'd seen the future, and it was unmanageable. A single act of performance art had shown them that the show could implode again, and the executives weren't willing to gamble millions on another round. Yet out of the wreckage came a legend, and a lesson Hollywood still pretends not to learn. The bill that came due. What happened on stage 23 in those chaotic days didn't just vanish into studio gossip, it hardened into legend. The week Tony Clifton hijacked Taxi became one of the most retold Hollywood stories, a tale passed around as both cautionary and iconic. On one hand, Andy Kaufman's refusal to break character cemented his reputation as a fearless performance artist, someone willing to risk his own job, his co-stars' patience, and even a network's goodwill just to keep a joke alive. On the other hand, that same defiance inflicted wounds that never truly healed. For Danny Devito and the rest of the cast, it was impossible to forget how quickly an experiment in comedy had turned into a logistical nightmare that threatened the very survival of their show. The damage was real. The press had their story. Kaufman, or rather Clifton, being escorted off set while executives sat in stunned silence. The narrative that spun out of that ambush overshadowed the work the cast and crew had been doing to keep Taxi one of television's most acclaimed sitcoms. Instead of celebrating the Emmy wins, the sharp writing, and the chemistry of the ensemble, the focus shifted to chaos, lateness, and lawsuits that never materialized. In the halls of Paramount, those memories weren't funny, they were warnings. And when network executives weighed whether to extend the show's run, those warnings echoed louder than ratings or fan enthusiasm ever could. But the legend outlived the damage. To Kaufman's admirers, the stunt was a masterpiece of boundary-pushing art, proof that he could bend the structures of mainstream television until they cracked. To his detractors, it was selfishness dressed up as genius, the moment one man's obsession nearly capsized a beloved series. Either way, people kept talking about it. Decades later, the Tony Clifton fiasco is remembered more vividly than half the episodes that actually aired, proof of how spectacle can outlast substance. The bill, however, had to be paid, and it was Taxi that paid it. Trust in the show had been compromised. Executives grew wary of giving it leeway. Every renewal discussion came shadowed by the fear of another stunt blowing up into a scandal. And when the time finally came to cut the cord, the justification didn't need to be said out loud. Everyone who'd been in that room, everyone who'd seen Clifton's perfume-drenched entrance, everyone who'd watched reporters swarm the lot, already knew the truth. The show had crossed a line it couldn't uncross. Devito's revelation makes it clear that the cancellation wasn't just about ratings charts or shifting time slots. It was about the intangible, invisible cost of chaos. Taxi was a hit. It was critically acclaimed. But in Hollywood, chaos carries interest, And eventually, someone has to pay it. For Kaufman, the Clifton stunt became legend. For the cast, it became a scar. And for Taxi, it became one more weight on the scale that finally tipped toward cancellation. For the network, the stunt became less about comedy and more about control. Television was a business first, and Kaufman's antics blurred the line between creative freedom and corporate liability. Executives had to ask themselves whether the unpredictability he embodied was worth the risk of alienating advertisers, disrupting production schedules, or undermining the carefully cultivated trust between showrunners and the studio. The very qualities that thrilled his fans, his volatility, his refusal to play by the rules, were the same qualities that made him unmanageable within a system that thrived on predictability. The story ends with a paradox. The very stunt that immortalized Kaufman also helped shorten the lifespan of one of television's greatest sitcoms. Taxi lives on in reruns, in awards, and in the careers it launched, but it also lives on in this cautionary tale. A reminder that even legends leave damage in their wake, and every bill eventually comes due. And that's the story Devito finally laid bare. A week of chaos, a legacy of brilliance and fallout, and the shocking truth of why Taxi was canceled long before audiences were ready to let it go. If this inside account changed how you see Taxi, tell us below. Was the Clifton stunt artistic courage or career sabotage? Like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the real stories behind TV's biggest turning points. And don't stop here. Watch the next video on your screen for another shocker pulled straight from the studio floor.